right, time for lesson 14. I've got my poker chips over here. I got my 4 aces. It's too bad we didn't get a chance to get to probability. We won't get a chance to get to probability. We could have talked a lot about cards and probabilities and things like that, but unfortunately, we're not going to get there. Lesson 14 today is what we call finding all 6. All 6 what? Well, by all 6, we mean all 6 trig things we've been talking about. They're actually called trig functions. We're talking about finding the sine, the cosine, the tangent, the secant, the cosecant, and the cotangent. There's your 6 right there. So what's going to happen in these problems is you're going to be given some information about 1 or 2 of these, and you've got to find all the remaining. So when you're done, you will have all 6 answers written. All right, that's what we mean by finding all 6. So you'll get some clues about 1 or 2 of them, and then you use those clues to come up with all the rest. So when you're finished, you should have all 6. So let's get to our first example.
Sorry.
Daughter's doing her Spanish over here. All right. So first example, I'm giving you 2 pieces of information and asking you to find the remaining. So again, when we're done, we'll have all 6. Right now we have 2 of them. We have cosine and sine, so we need to find tangent, secant, cosecant, and cotangent. All right, so how are we going to go about doing that? Well, the first thing we need to establish is what quadrant we're in, and you're going to be able to tell that from the original question. It's telling us that the cosine of some angle theta is positive 1/2, and the sine of some angle theta is positive radical 3/2. Where on the coordinate plane, what quadrant is both sine and cosine positive at the same time? The only place that happens is in the A quadrant. So we are in quadrant 1. So we have some angle theta that's sitting in quadrant 1, and this is the information we know about it. Let me draw this a little bigger so you can see this better. So I'm just going to randomly draw some random angle theta in quadrant 1. I don't know how big this angle is. Don't care, I just know that it's in quadrant 1. What I'm going to do is make a right triangle out of this angle, because it tells us that the cosine of theta is 1/2, and we should know that cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So the side adjacent is 1, and the hypotenuse is 2. We were also told that the sine of theta is radical 3/2. Sine is opposite over hypotenuse, so the opposite side is radical 3, and the hypotenuse is 2, which we already knew from the first given. So there's our picture. So once we have our picture established, and we know that we're in the first quadrant, we're in the A quadrant where all are positive, we can find all the other things we need. So what order do we want to do that in? It doesn't matter. I'm just going to go ahead and find the tangent first. We find tangent by doing opposite over adjacent, so radical 3/1. Then from there, once I have these 3, finding the secant, the cosecant, and the cotangent is very simple. Those are the reciprocals of all of these. So since we have all of these, it's going to be easy. Secant is the reciprocal of cosine. Cosine was 1/2, so the secant is going to be 2/1. Cosecant is the reciprocal of sine, so we just flip the sine answer, so it'll be 2 over radical 3. Cotangent is the reciprocal of tangent, which will just be this flipped over, which is 1 over radical 3. Every single answer here is positive because we're in the A quadrant. Since we were in the A quadrant, the cosine, the sine, and the tangent were all positive, which means that their reciprocals are all going to be positive. So if you look up here, we have found all 6. 2 of them were given to us, cosine and sine. We found the tangent, the secant, the cosecant, and the cotangent for a grand total of all 6. I'm going to erase and do another example. All right, next example. This time I'm telling you the cosecant of some angle. I'm going to use that new Greek letter phi, just so you get used to seeing it. It's 5/3. The cosine of phi is negative 4/5. So before we get any further, we have to establish what quadrant we are in. So let's take a look at what we know here. Cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. So if the cosecant is positive, 5/3, then sine must also be positive. So this is our clue that sine is positive. All right, again, if cosecant's positive, its reciprocal sine is going to be positive. Now look what also we know here. Cosine is negative 4/5. So cosine is negative. So we're looking for a quadrant where sine is positive and cosine's negative at the same time. That is the S quadrant. So we are in quadrant 2. That's the first thing we have to establish, so that can help us tell where to draw our angle. So let me redraw the picture now a little bit larger now that we've established we're in the S quadrant. So what I have is some angle that's opened up and landed in quadrant 2, the S quadrant. And the angle's called phi. Now, this is phi right here. But remember, I can use its reference angle instead and still get the same results. That's what reference angles are for. So I'm going to label the reference angle phi right here and make that my right triangle and begin labeling it. So let's label. We know that the cosecant is 5/3. So that's going to actually help me find one of my 6 right now. If cosecant is 5/3, then that must mean sine is 3/5 because they're reciprocals of each other. So I can go to this triangle right here and label my sides because I know sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So the opposite's 3, the hypotenuse is 5. Now, I was also told that the cosine of phi is 4/5. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. Adjacent over hypotenuse. So this side must be 4, and the hypotenuse we already knew was 5. Now, what about the negative? The negative's there because we're in the S quadrant and cosine has to be negative. You don't need to label this -4 right here. This is the distance of a side on a triangle. We don't want to call that a negative value. Once I have my triangle established, I'm ready. I've got everything I need. We've got the cosecant, we've got the cosine, we've got the sine. Let's do the tangent. The tangent of phi, tangent is opposite over adjacent, so it's going to be 3/4. But it's going to be negative because we are in the S quadrant. Tangent's negative there. So what's missing? We've got 4 of the 6. We're missing secant. Secant is the reciprocal of cosine. So if I just take cosine and flip it, I've got the secant. The reciprocal of -4/5 is -5/4. I got to keep the negative because they work with one another. What else is missing? I got sine, cosine, tangent. Oh, I'm missing cotangent. So let's go ahead and do the cotangent of phi. That's going to be the tangent flipped. -3/4 flipped is -4/3. I now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I have found all 6. We're going to do one more. All right, this last example is the most challenging of the 3 that I will have done here. So this time I'm using angle A as my angle. Just you can use letters sometimes. We've seen that in some other questions in the homeworks. First thing I want to do is establish what quadrant I'm in. I'm being told that the cosecant of this angle is 41/9 and the secant is smaller than 0. So we'll get to that in a second. Let's start with this. If the cosecant of A is 41/9, that tells us something about the sine of A. It tells us actually a couple of things about the sine of A. First, it tells us what the sine of A is. Sine is the reciprocal of cosecant. So if I take 41/9 and I flip it, it's 9/41. But that also tells me that my sine value is positive. I'm looking for a place where sine is positive. But look at this clue over here. Secant is smaller than 0. Smaller than 0 means it's negative. Secant is cosine's reciprocal. So if the secant is negative, that means the cosine is negative. So I'm looking for a place where sine is positive and cosine's negative. What quadrant is that? That's going to be the S quadrant again, quadrant 2. So that's how I've established where I am. So we have some angle that has opened up and landed itself in quadrant 2. But like the previous example, instead of using that angle, I'm going to drop this down, make a right angle, make a right triangle, and make that angle A, use the reference angle instead. So let's label what we know. We know the sine of this angle is 9/41, and sine is opposite over hypotenuse. That's all we have. We don't have any other information. If I have a right triangle and I know 2 sides and I'm missing the 3rd, how do I do that? Pythagorean theorem. So let's do that work real quick. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. So you're not always going to be told all 3 sides. You may have to find that missing side real quick. All right, Pythagorean theorem. Remember, your C squared is always your hypotenuse, so 41 squared is going to go there. 9 can go in for A or B, so I'll put it here for A. And then I'm just going to solve for B. All right, 9 squared is 81. 41 squared is actually 1,681. You can do that on a calculator if you need to. Subtract the 81 over to the other side, and you get B squared equals 1,600. Square root both sides, and you find out that B is 40. So that means this missing side right here is 40. Now I've got everything I need to find all 6. So in this problem, what do we have so far? We know the cosecant and we know the sine. We're missing 4 more. So let's find those missing 4. I'll do cosine first, I guess. So let's find the cosine of A. The cosine of A, right here, adjacent over hypotenuse, 40 over 41. But we're in the S quadrant, so it's negative 40 over 41. Tangent of A. Tangent is opposite over adjacent, so that's going to be 9 over 40. S quadrant, tangent's negative. All right, let's find, what are we missing now? We need secant. All we knew about secant was it was less than 0. We didn't actually have the secant though. Secant we can get because secant is the reciprocal of cosine. If you take cosine and flip it, negative 40 over 41 becomes negative 41 over 40. So there's my secant. All that's left now is cotangent. The cotangent of A will be the tangent flipped. So negative 9 over 40 flipped would be negative 40 over 9. And now I have all 6. Let me know if you have questions once you get done with the homework. There is finding all 6.